actual right to a voice on the job, or right to a decent wage, or right to health care, retirement security, actual rights instead of you're on your own, brother.
No, that's right, and I think you can see that that's one of the aspects of the defeat of this social welfare state has been the creation of this rhetoric, whether it was Reagan's peacekeepers, which were really some of the worst ICBM missiles ever created, to Tomahawk missiles, rather, to this notion of right to work, which is really Orwellian in the fact that it's exactly the opposite. But that's really what part of Kill It to Save It is about, is that this movement to dismantle the public interest in the public sector and the public good has been fed to us within the language of freedom. The language of, as I call in the book, junk freedom. This notion that somehow freedom is not about the ability to get an education or the ability to have a good job. It's really just about the ability to be free from government intrusion, unless you happen to be a woman who wants an abortion or a transgender person who wants to use the bathroom of their choice.
Right. And they also use the concept of Tina. There's no alternative. We have to do this. And I remember, here in Pennsylvania in 2011, as they went to destroy the unemployment compensation insurance program, saying that, we had a massive deficit, never mind the fact that, employers hadn't been paying anything into it, at all over the last 20 years, and left it defunded from the beginning. But we have to have these draconian cuts. We have to, have these massive increases, and we have to cut the number of people who can get it because we're trying to save the program.
That's right. Yeah, that's Kill It to Save It in a nutshell. But, I also want to make it clear, this book was written primarily with the understanding and assumption that Hillary Clinton would be the next president. And so while I was able to finish the book after the election and correct a few parts, what's really clear, and has been clear to me, is that part of the reasons the Democrats lost is that they've been part of this program and, in fact, have been promoting Kill It to Save It policies as well.
Yep.
So when we talk about, why some of these programs have failed, and you mentioned Tina, there is no alternative, as opposed to Timba, there must be a better way, a better alternative. One of the advocates of Tina have been the neoliberal Democrats, the Clintonians, who essentially not only argued there is no alternative to neoliberalism, but also there's no alternative to the Democratic Party when it comes to progressives. And so I think that their triangulation strategy, finally really came back to bite them. And I think that one of the best moments of this, of this kind of chaos and fiasco that is American politics today, is that we've really opened up some space for real progressives and left folks to be out there, not just organizing and demonstrating in the streets, but also constructing a new vision of what kind of country we want.
Right. Because here's the thing, and I know a lot of my labor friends who voted for Donald Trump, listen to the rhetoric.
Right.
And the rhetoric was, a lot of what the labor movement had been telling their members. We want sane trade policies. We want to bring back manufacturing. It's the economy, stupid. And this vision of we're going to bring back the 1950s where you can live on one income and everything's going to be great. And the Democrats couldn't take that ground because they were complicit in letting that stuff go.
Absolutely. I call it a paralysis in the book. No, I think you're absolutely right. I have a section towards the end of the book called "It's the Political Economy, Stupid," and it's really clear to me that labor, certainly, the not the rank and file, but the bigger folks in labor and the business union folks of labor have also been part of the problem historically. And, whether we go back to labor unions fighting for white privilege more than class unity, to the contemporary aspects of unionism, who followed Donald Trump because, they had to believe somebody. And the Democrats were no longer believable or credible when it came to class politics. In fact, even this new analysis that the Democrats lost because they didn't pay enough attention to the white working class and were too invested in identity politics is a slight misreading and almost turning on its head of what the issues are. Because yes, the Democrats have adopted this kind of boutique identity politics where it was always about marketing to a particular group here and a particular group there, instead of recognizing the kind of multiracial class politics they needed to articulate and what kind of policies that would require. And so if they now bend over backwards towards specifically a white working class, I think they're just going to make similar mistakes over and over again. We really need a much better multiracial sense of what class politics have to be about.
Yeah, but at the end of it, to me, it always comes back to the narrative. And Republicans do a much better job of telling stories, as where Democrats get, just get wordy and off onto the off into the wherever they go. And it comes back to that basic messaging. You look at the New Deal. It was about making people's lives better. Didn't care if you were black, white, orange, purple. It was about making people's lives better. And at the end of it, the Democrats had better figure out how they no longer cater to Wall Street and to the super rich to stay politically viable with the money. But and I think Bernie Sanders showed how this can happen, but actually talking about how we make people's lives better.
I think that's absolutely right. But I do think we can't ignore that even the New Deal had its white supremacy. That certain programs helped some people more than others. And so I do think we can still be anti-racist and pro-working class, and we don't have to make decisions about whether or not, do we come down hard on policies that are inherently unequal because they don't account for racial inequity. We can still consider those aspects as part of a class politics. We just have to be careful about trying to tell stories that are too simple. And I do think that's always been a problem with the Democrats, is that they will only tell stories that they think are marketable, whereas the Republicans actually take the time to generate the narrative to make sense with people. We need to be educative. We need to actually tell stories that are educational and true, but we can tell them in a way that will grasp people's needs and imagination.
Now, would you argue that the Democrats haven't done a very good job of building infrastructure and the echo chamber that the right has? Because, to do what you're saying, you do need to have those vehicles to get to people.
I think that's right. And I think, here you are, you have a show, and I think your show has an impact. And I think we need to do a much better job of that. MSNBC started out as a kind of progressive news station, but pretty much became an echo chamber for the Democrats. And I think they've lost that. We need a solid progressive left press that's not only about marketing, but it's also about narrative. And, I was listening to the first hour of the show, and, I want to thank you for having me on, and now I'm going to offer a critique. But, I think that the kind of all Russia all the time and the fascination with Trump it's important to bring down the thugs. But, to my mind, Pence and Ryan and other folks are going to be even worse thugs in some way. They may not be the gangsters that Trump is, but they're still thugs. And we need to really make sure that we're not just talking about Trump and the conspiracies and the scandals, but we're also looking at, and I thought your correspondent in D.C. did a great job in fleshing out some of these other policies that are coming down. And what these new tax bills and what the new Trump Care and all these other things are doing to really forward this kill it to save it mentality, and will leave us no public infrastructure. So we really need to make sure that we keep our eyes on the prize as far as that goes. Trump may come or go, but this struggle for some kind of social justice is still going to be there.
I'm with you. And the attack on the 20th century continues. So. And it's what we're seeing right before our eyes, and it's nothing new. So, the idea, as you were saying before, that this last election, all of those things that you brought up were not about just this last election.
That's right.
It's been the last several years.
That's
and
right.
You go back to the foundation of the DLC and that whole push of being Republican light.
That's right.
So, coming back to the book, what are the marching orders for people? How do we turn this around? How do we go from the Reagan era ketchup is a vegetable and slashing school funding and school lunch programs to being that nation, of making people's lives better?
I have no clue.
Honest, I love it.
but that's is actually part of the answer, right? I have no clue. I don't have marching orders for people. I know what historically has worked, and in fact, I'm writing a book now called American Fascism. And while the argument is that we have fascism in our DNA from our origins, that we also have anti-fascism, and that there have been incredible, strong social movements throughout our history that have changed the structure of our country for the better at some of the worst-looking moments ever. And if you think about the history of the civil rights movement coming out of McCarthyism, there are very dark moments in our country, and we come out of them sometimes in incredible ways. My best feeling right now comes when I watch thousands and thousands of people take to the streets, or even more notable, the airports. Can you imagine people going to some of the worst places in the world, U.S. airports, and spending hour upon hour, day after day, protesting the travel or Muslim ban from Trump? So people are responding in very productive ways by being out there in opposition. But I also think we need to be really active locally, because democracy starts in local communities. And if we can make the effort to get involved in local communities and local politics, and then really translate them into larger and collective movements, the actual marching orders are going to come from those movements, not from anyone like me.
There you go. The correct answer to that question was read my book. Just to let you know.
I need marketing advice.
There you go. Again, Kill It to Save It, an autopsy of capitalism's triumph over democracy, written by Corey Dolgan. We'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com of how you can pick it up. Corey, it was great talking with you. Love to have you back again real soon.
Oh, thank you, Rick. I'd love to come back.
Good stuff. Thanks so much. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. This is The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Hear what I say. It's money that matters in the USA. It's money that matters.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1904. That was the day that 18,000 workers in Chicago's stockyards went out on strike. Work in the stockyards was often brutal and dangerous. Thousands of workers toiled in the yards, many of them immigrants from Eastern Europe. They worked butchering and processing the hogs and cattle raised in the American West into meat for distribution by rail to consumers across the country. The industry gave Chicago the nickname Hog Butcher for the World. In 1904, the Amalgamated Meat Cutters Union organized a strike. The main demand was increased wages. The meatpacking companies were able to get scabs to cross the picket lines and act as strikebreakers. Most were African Americans and European immigrants. Many of these workers had not been organized by the union, which was dominated by the skilled German and Irish packing house workers. Novelist Upton Sinclair visited the stockyards during the strike to research conditions faced by the workers. In his famous novel, The Jungle, Sinclair gave a fictionalized account that captured the devastating impact of the scabs on the strike. He wrote, quote, "Such were the stockyards during the strike, while the unions watched in sullen despair, and the country clamored like a greedy child for its food, and the packers went grimly on their way. Each day they added new workers, and could be more stern with the old ones, could put them on piecework, and dismiss them if they did not keep pace." It was not until the 1930s, when the stockyard unions took seriously the task of organizing across race, ethnic, and skill lines, that they finally won a contract and gained the rights of union recognition. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME.
Exposing GOP half-truths, lies, and hypocrisy every weeknight from 9 to midnight. Rick Smith.
Everything's raising, but the weight is.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show.
Everything's raising,
Check out the
but
website,
weight
thericksmithshow.com. Kind of missed that one. Gonna have to fix that bumper. Here's the thing, and you know, Corey makes an interesting point. It's not all about Russia. It's not all about Trump. It's about the agenda. And as I said earlier in the hour, the reality is Trump is basically the Republicans' puppet right now. He's going to have to go along with the pay or die insurance. He's going to have to go along with the massive tax breaks. He's going to have to go along with the Republican agenda, which, you know, we've been talking about for years being, well, anti-worker, anti-community, and really pro, well, 1.5%. At the end of it, the attacks are still happening. And the shiny thing, the distraction, is what's going on with the hearings, which, look, it's like any good train wreck. You're paying attention to it. But also you need to pay attention to what else is going on. And Politico did a good article on Friday that I liked that pointed out, look, there's some stuff going on. You know, one of the big ones is a huge boost for the Ubers, for the McDonald's, for the gig economy, for the low-wage sectors who at one point, you know, during the Obama administration, you were trying to get them, you know, properly classified. You're trying to create rules through the Department of Labor to increase overtime protections, to make the ability for people to join and form unions a little bit easier, not easy, but a little bit easier than they are right now. Because understand, and you go back to when the National Labor Relations Act was passed, the Wagner Act back in 1935. There's not a single syllable in that act that gives employers any rights, because they understood at the time that employers had all the rights. They decide the working conditions, the wages, how many people they're going to hire, if they're going to hire anybody. They have all of the control. And that the Wagner Act gave workers a little bit of a say, gave them a seat at the table instead of a position on the menu. Since then, it's been an attack on how do you undo that. Now, the original National Labor Relations Act was very simple. You sign cards, you authorize a representative, you begin to bargain. There was no secret ballots, there was no harassment period, there were no closed captive meetings, there was none of that stuff. And what you saw is about a third of the workforce eventually join and form unions and create the most powerful, most prosperous working class in history. To me, the natural rate of unionization is about a third. You see that in other countries that don't allow the insane things that we allow in this country to happen to workers. Now, you look at what's happened over the last couple of years with the gig economy. You've got the Ubers, the Lyfts, the Postmates, a bunch of them, and everyone, you're on your own. It's like selling newspapers on the corner when I was a kid. You made a nickel, you got to keep the nickel. It did nothing to help anyone outside of the industry. There was no floor or any of that stuff. We're going back to that because the Trump administration has withdrawn. It was taken away the guidance to the Department of Labor that the Obama administration had put forth. And you look at the attacks on overtime, for instance, with the and I love this. It's the Flexible Families, or the Flexible Working Class Act, or whatever it was, that basically undid overtime, which now you can work 100 hours a week and not get paid overtime, because they'll tell you at some point down the road, maybe you'll get a day off. Now, you don't get to choose when that happens. They do. The other thing that's interesting to me is that the Department of Justice, their slush fund has been taken away. Because a couple of years ago, if you remember, there was a Bank of America settlement where there was a bunch of money, billions of dollars. And some of that money went to the Department of Justice, in order to help the people who had been screwed. That is gone. That will be given away. And you go, wait a second. What happened to a government of, for, and by we the people? What happened to the idea that we help the most vulnerable, that we help those who have been cheated and screwed? No, not so much. And you look at the trade thing. And again, I say a lot of the white working class in this country voted for Trump simply because he said what, I've been saying for a long time. NAFTA's been a screw job for the working class of this country on a bunch of levels. And we need a trade policy that is going to take us to a higher road instead of the low road. The concept of least restrictive trade barrier is a horrible, horrible position. What it has done is it has raced working people to the bottom. And we know that. He came out and said, look, we're gonna renegotiate. It's going to be a great deal. Evidently, they have negotiated a deal on sugar exports that has, I guess, averted the latest opportunity of a trade war. But at the end of the day, someone's got to sit down and figure out how is it we stop this mentality of, the race to the bottom. I had someone recently, and this is one of those things that drives me nuts about elitist liberals, who said, all of those manufacturing jobs, all of that stuff it's gone the way of the buggy whip. All of those working class jobs, we don't need them. Get rid of them. We just need to educate people. And look, I'm not anti-education. I think we do need to educate everyone, and we need to have free college for people to be able to get those skills and to move on. In fact, I think we should be expanding high school to include 2 more years so you can walk out with not just a high school diploma, but an associate's degree in something. We're now moving to an era where education, if you don't get it early on, you're going to lead a very difficult life. And as a country, we've got to come to that realization. Instead of saddling a generation of kids with massive debt just to get a couple of skills. But the point here is that we always need productive jobs. We always need to have some type of manufacturing base, if not for national security, for the entrepreneurial ideals that come out of it. The idea that you're learning how to build something with your hands and tinkering with machines, that's what made this country great. That's what made us exceptional, is that you could be like the guy I knew a couple years back who worked in a sewing machine factory. His job was sewing suits, and he figured out how to fix or how to use a sewing machine to put little dots in these smart chips, which made the transistors and made them faster, and he made a lot of money doing it. But it started with the guy had a job where you produced something. You worked with your hands. There was manufacturing. We're losing that. In fact, since, what was the statistic? And I think even Trump quoted it. We've lost 60,000 manufacturing facilities with more than 500 employees each since 2000. And I would argue we didn't lose them. We know exactly where they are. They're in China. And they're in Mexico. And they're in all of these other desperate countries that we've given our manufacturing base to. The U.S. used to be the manufacturer of the world. Not so much. And what's interesting to me is Trump got to that message. And a lot of us, a lot of people bought into it. And while we're focused on Russia and all the other stuff, none of these other things are coming true either. And I keep asking my labor friends, what are you going to do when Trump can't deliver? Because remember, healthcare was supposed to be great. It was supposed to be tremendous. It was supposed to be wonderful. We're supposed to cover everyone. It's not going to. And it's going to be more expensive, which is just weird to me. What do you do with that anger? What do people do when they realize that they've been sold a line? I'd love to hear your thoughts. 1-888-520-RICK, 1-888-520-7425. Quick break, right back. Stick around.
Never turn, I'll never bend. I'm with you now until the end.
Thought-provoking, intelligent conversation with a heart. The voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
We are one canoe, one island, one planet. We cannot afford to mess this up.
As Trump steps back from the Paris Climate Agreement, Hawaii steps up.
California is all in.
Defiant California partners with China on clean energy. Switching from coal to solar would save 52,000 lives a year. Plus,
rooftop solar will shine again in Nevada after spending nearly 2 years under a dark cloud.
Elections have consequences. Nevada Democrats reverse anti-solar regulations.
All of that good news and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Is it hot in here, or did I just pull out of the Paris Accord? Zavinga!
This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, even North Korea has condemned Donald Trump for withdrawing from the landmark UN Paris Climate Agreement, calls global warming, quote, one of the gravest challenges humankind is facing today. North Korea's Ministry of Foreign Affairs called Trump's decision, quote, short-sighted and silly, and said that the United States shows, quote, ignorance of the fact that it is in their own best interests. That's North Korea.
Yeah, I know.
Reminding me of what Bill Maher said about this over the weekend.
Really? The country that is always threatening to blow up the planet wants to save the planet.
And on top of that, the top U.S. diplomat stationed in China has resigned from his post over Trump's decision to withdraw from the UN Paris Climate Agreement. Acting U.S. Ambassador to China David Rank reportedly told embassy staff that he could not support and would not implement Trump's climate policies as, quote, a parent, a patriot, and a Christian.
Well, he's just winning everywhere, isn't he?
Seems like it. Meanwhile, Hawaii has become the first U.S. state to pass laws to legally implement the global accord, with new legislation to accelerate policy mechanisms to reduce Hawaii's greenhouse gas emissions. At a press conference in Honolulu on Tuesday, Hawaii's Democratic Governor David Ige noted Hawaii is already grappling with climate change impacts like extreme weather, coral bleaching, and rising sea levels, and that managing Hawaii's natural resources is critical to the state's economy.
As an island state, we are especially aware of the limits of our natural environment. We have a kuleana, a responsibility to malama, to steward our island home.
Not to be outdone, California Governor Jerry Brown was in China this week to sign a partnership agreement with the Chinese government to coordinate with the government on clean energy technology, carbon capture and storage, and carbon emissions trading.
California is all in, 100% in meeting the Paris agreements, in fact, going beyond. We only do that if we can work with China, Chinese provinces, to get the job done.
So Trump's decision is definitely a setback that will cost pretty much everyone on the planet precious time in the race against accelerating climate impacts. But there may be a silver lining if it ultimately ends up galvanizing more action.
Maybe we should thank Donald Trump for helping the world rally around the Paris Climate Agreement, something that many people in this country, at least, had no idea what it even was until Trump left it.
Meanwhile, the Trump administration has been repeating debunked, inaccurate estimates of the costs of the Paris Agreement.
Not my Trump administration.
But ignoring the benefits of transitioning to clean energy, including the fact that it will save lives. According to a new study out this week from Michigan Technological University, swapping out coal in generating electricity and replacing it with solar energy in the United States would prevent 52,000 premature deaths in the United States caused by coal's air pollution every year. To put that into perspective, the U.S. coal industry employs 51,000 people total, but switching to renewable energy would save 52,000 lives.
Per year.
Finally, in Nevada, the state legislature has rolled back its rollback of solar incentives just a year and a half after its Public Utility Commission phased out financial incentives for rooftop solar owners that gutted the state's solar industry.
That's great news.
It is. Expected to be signed by Republican Governor Brian Sandoval. The legislation restores net metering rates for homeowners to sell their excess energy back to the grid and requires the state's utilities to get 40% of their electricity from renewable sources by 2030.
It's interesting because this comes after the Republicans had taken control of the state legislature in the previous session. Now Democrats are back in power, and they are rolling back this ridiculous regulation that blocked rooftop solar in Nevada. Nevada, one of the sunniest states in the nation.
Elections have consequences.
Yes, they do. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us, follow us, and share us worldwide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Rebuilding America. The Rick Smith Show.
The walls come tumbling down. The walls come crumbling, crumbling. The walls come tumbling, tumbling down.
Janice sent me an email during the break asking about Infrastructure Week and pointing out a couple of tweets from Donald Trump that showed the Infrastructure Week plan from the president. Look, on Friday, he tweeted out a couple of things, saying we're going to get rid of regulation. We're going to do some things to build the infrastructure. And I'm going, wouldn't that have been something good to do on, I don't know, Monday? Instead of the barrage of tweets they had last week. Now, if you didn't know, the White House deemed last week as Infrastructure Week, where we're going to rebuild the roads and the bridges, and we were going to invest in broadband access, and we were going to do, none of that. No, we're going to privatize the FAA. That's the goal, and we're going to give Wall Street a big sloppy wet kiss by turning our infrastructure over to them. By having these schemes, these P3 schemes, these public-private partnerships, which is nothing more than payday lending for infrastructure. But I did find it interesting that I got a number of trolls saying, it's what we need to do with the private sector because they can do it smarter and faster and cheaper, which is a great frame. And, going back to, the earlier discussion, the right, they spend money on messaging. They spend money on constantly hammering the message that somehow the private sector always does stuff better. They always do it cheaper, faster, better, all of that. And yet, for 12 years now, I've been asking, show me something that we've privatized, something that we used to do for ourselves, like lock people up, like park in a city, any of that stuff that we used to do. Have, turnpikes that, used to be well paved, all of that stuff that we used to do for ourselves that we then sold off to private industry because they managed it better, that actually was managed better and actually benefited we the people. And in 12 years, I haven't had anyone who has come up with that shining star. There's not one thing where you go, that's it, winner. No, none of that. I can point out a bunch of losers. And if you park in any major city, losers being the people who have to park their cars. Especially on the streets with the meters. I know in Harrisburg, when I go into the city there, it's a nightmare. They doubled the fines. They cut in half the amount of time you have to pay the fines, and they've mechanized the whole system to where, good luck. They're on you all the time because there's a profit motive. The one thing they are really good is extracting money from taxpayers. You go down the list, and prisons. We now lock up more people than virtually any country in the world, and we've given them that with contracts that guarantee 85% occupancy. So the idea of saying we're going to privatize our infrastructure, we're going to put a cash box on every street corner, Wall Street knows what to do. I agree. Wall Street knows what to do. They know how to make money, and they know how to make it off of us. So the plan that came out last week was not really a plan, but a scheme, a gimmick. At a time when we really need infrastructure, we need spending. Understand, and I've had this conversation 1,000 times with people saying, the future is the internet. The future of business and life is the web. Computers, that's the future. Yet we don't spend very much money on preparing the next generation, or the current generation for that matter, on how we participate in that economy. We have some of the worst broadband access speeds in the entire world. So just come with me on this. If the future of this country is internet, having, slow, pathetic internet, do you think that that's going to harm your ability to compete in a global economy? And I understand we've always had a global economy. It's not new. It just provides different challenges. So it's not new. But understand, we live in this new world of instant everything, and speed matters. Yet investment, not so much. We've now think about this for a second. We've said to the big internet provider companies, provide us with what we need as a nation to compete and survive. And ask yourself, have they done it? I mean, I still get cell phone service where you go, no, I can't hear you. It's not a matter of can you hear me now? I can't even hear you say that. The speeds are pathetic. And yet we're not investing at a pace where I believe we should be, which is why, again, you need to have a federal government who says, we're going to make sure that we do for the entire country. Now, their infrastructure plan is interesting. It's the stuff that Wall Street is unwilling to do, they're going to provide incentives for states to do. Understand, the states are broke. They don't have the money to do the mass infrastructure programs that need to happen. And even then, they want to drill that down to the local communities. And guess what? They don't have it either. But understand, if they did, stop and think about when this concept boils down to where local communities will provide their own infrastructure. Again, wealthy communities will have the best infrastructure money can provide, and poorer urban areas are going to continue to struggle. Poor rural areas are going to continue to struggle. Poor people are going to struggle. I live in an area where if it weren't for the Electrification Act, we would probably still be using candles. If it weren't for them saying, all of the country has to be covered with telephone lines as a mandate, we'd probably still be using smoke signals. When you give the Wall Street folks this kind of control to then decide which infrastructure projects get done, the most profitable ones will be the ones that get done, not the ones that benefit society, the most profitable. And I get people saying, well, when we did that, we had bridges to nowhere. Yeah, and look, I'm in favor of a bridge to nowhere because eventually it leads somewhere. It's called expansion. It's called expanding to new areas. I'm sure on the other side of that bridge, you're going to get people who are going, hey, let's build something. Because you have the right infrastructure. And this is where, it used to be, as a couple of the friends of mine who are congressmen used to say, it was a yawn vote. They would go in and say, you know what? We love having ribbon cuttings. We love saying, hey, we brought home these projects. What the hell happened? When did paving the roads and building a new bridge and investing in the future, the idea that we reach for the edge of technology, the idea that we reach for the stars. I mean, when did it happen that in my lifetime we went from, let's race to space to, well, let's not bother. That costs too much. We're broke, don't have any money. Yet we're at the wealthiest period in history of being the wealthiest nation. It's just divided up a little interestingly. And again, it comes back down to that era that, and to me, started kind of with Kennedy with his tax cuts from the 92 down to 70%. And then really just Reagan. It was pedal to the metal from the 70% tax rate all the way down to 28%. And then slap in the face to working people, we're going to tax unemployment benefits. Question is when do we say enough? When do we say stop? And as I've been saying, look, people are in the streets. We've gone to a bunch of marches. There are going to be tons more. There's more activism. There's interest now. The question is, which direction do we go? And look, the right wing is spending a ton of money to try and instigate people on their side to get out in the streets. Just this weekend, there was a march against Sharia law. And I'm going, is Sharia law happening in the U.S.? I mean, did I miss it? It's not my neighborhood. I haven't seen it in the state. I haven't seen any. I haven't seen it. Maybe somewhere. Maybe someone should be looking into the Christian version of Sharia law. Just a thought. But they want to continue to push their agenda, which is anti-worker, anti-woman, anti-immigrant, anti-minority. and I would argue anti-American. At the end of the day, it's keeping the well-heeled well-heeled. It's keeping the well-to-do well-separated and not responsible or responsive to the needs of we the people. At some point, with all of this energy, the hope is that we move forward to make people's lives better. And I keep coming back to that because that's important. Every person should have a job. Every person should have opportunity to access education. If we're the wealthiest nation in the history of the world, at the wealthiest point in history, that should be kind of the minimum. When you get sick, you should see a doctor. When you want to improve your skills, you should be able to get an education without being saddled with a lifetime of debt. But here again, it's another one of those areas where we've been pitted against one another. And at some point, it's got to stop. Anyway, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll wrap things up. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1936. That was the day Remington Rand President James Rand boasted of a new scheme. He called it the Mohawk Valley Formula. It served as a blueprint for the future of union busting. The National Labor Relations Board called it a battle plan for industrial war. The workers at Remington Rand had walked out on strike in late May after enduring a year of anti-union harassment, threatened plant closures, and firings of top union leaders. The company used a number of dirty tricks during the strike to mislead and demoralize strike forces. In his book, The Last Great Strike, Ahmed White describes the purpose and function of the formula, writing, quote, "The scheme figured in the Little Steel Strike, as several authorities would accuse the steel companies of patterning their response to the steel strike after Rand's formula. It consisted of no fewer than 9 steps, all oriented to employing threatening armed forces, spies, and provocateurs, company-sponsored back-to-work movements, and staged reopenings to terrorize and demoralize strikers, provoke strikers to violence and discredit them, then use the specter of violence and pretense of a state of emergency to mobilize opposition to the strike on the part of local police and courts, and finally announcing that the strike had been broken and that any remaining resistance was the work of an intractable minority hostile to community values and the right to work." The central insight behind the formula was that violence could be used not only to drive workers off the picket lines and paralyze them with fear, but also to turn both the law and political sentiments against unionists while justifying the employer's own conduct and excluding its contempt for labor rights.
From United Nations headquarters in New York, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, for Talk Media News. Meet the DUP. The Democratic Unionist Party of Northern Ireland has agreed to help British Prime Minister Theresa May form a coalition government, narrowly staving off her replacement as Prime Minister by Jeremy Corbyn of the Labour Party. Theresa May suffered a historic rout at the ballot box on Thursday in an election she originally called in a bid to strengthen her hand in Brexit negotiations. The DUP party, which controls just 10 seats in the House of Commons, is in favor of a so-called soft Brexit, in which the UK might retain access to the EU's common marketplace and other sweetheart deals while not paying into the EU budget. But now, having lost seats and with her Conservative Party standing taking a major hit, it's likely the European Union leaders will be even less willing to compromise with May over the next 2 years of Brexit talks. And yesterday we discussed a move by Iraqi Kurdistan to hold an independence vote in September. While the world's 35 million Kurds have a strong case to make for self-governance, the cards are stacked against them. The Iraqi government in Baghdad doesn't want to lose what could be a third of the country's territory. The U.S., too, has come out against the move, arguing about the importance of Iraqi unity. Now, another semi-autonomous area, the Spanish province of Catalonia, has unilaterally called for an independence vote of its own, in defiance of the central government and courts in Madrid. The Catalonian vote is scheduled for October. There was a non-binding independence vote in Catalonia 3 years ago, and the results were decisive, with some 80% of voters opting for self-governance and for a split from Spain. Catalonian leaders say this vote will be binding, though it's uncertain exactly how far they're willing to go, or able to go, to push the Spanish government, who say a unilateral move to break away is unconstitutional. For more global news headlines, visit talkmedianews.com.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Website, thericksmithshow.com. Bob sent me an email saying, I listened to your interview earlier with the author. Did you know today is the day that Ronald Reagan gave his speech in Berlin to tear down the wall? Yeah, I remember it well. 1987 was the big speech, and it got almost no fanfare in the U.S. whatsoever. Now, the Russian media called it, warmongering and all of that other stuff. And everyone now points to, especially conservatives, point to that moment as, he was being tough on Russia. He brought down the wall, when the reality is, I would argue Lane Kirkland and the AFL-CIO did more to bring down the wall than did Ronald Reagan. Outside of Reagan's, spending huge amounts of money on defense and the arms war that went on that ultimately broke the Russians. But it was the Solidarity movement in Poland that really, was part of the big catalyst, heavily funded by the AFL-CIO. If only they'd have spent that money in building here. Also today in history, the birth of Anne Frank. She would have been 88 years old today. She was given a diary on her 13th birthday back in 1942, and it became the book we all know. Also today, the Pulse nightclub massacre happened. It will be marked with a tribute. The church bells throughout Orlando will ring 49 times. And flags flown at half-mast. Again, it's just a horrible moment in our history. One of those things just to remember. Sad stuff. And here's the thing, and this is the part that gets me. We've really turned into this country that some are almost insane. And you saw over the weekend these marches across the country. They weren't well attended, but they were well armed. Where you had these militia types, out with their AR-15s, and they're dressed up like they're in the military, taking photos of each other with representatives. And one of them, the more concerning one, was in Atlanta, where Republican Michael Williams actually spoke at the March Against Sharia, and took pictures with all the gun nuts. It's one of those things that's kind of scary, especially when you consider what happened in Florida not too long ago. Where a guy was arrested. We'll have to get to this tomorrow. I hate when that happens. Thanks for tuning in. It's the end of the show. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks so much.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email